Welcome to COM 4740, Highlights of Chapter 9, Popular Culture. Chapter 9 is about pop culture, which is short for popular culture. So we're going to start off by looking at some different types of culture, defining those, and then we're going to zero in on popular culture, what it is, how we create it, and how it affects our lives. So let's start by looking at a variety of culture types, beginning with folk culture. The main characteristic to remember about folk culture is that people don't do it to make money. The primary motive for participating in folk culture is not financially driven. Folk culture is how people express themselves in a particular culture. It's the organic way they express themselves through crafts or song or ceremonies, rites and rituals. It's motivated by creating a sense of community. It's motivated by continuing tradition, things like that. So we could say that music, dance, crafts, things of that nature that are often traditional to a particular cultural group, and this is usually localized. So I've given you some examples here of folk culture. Native American powwows would be one. A tribe will get together periodically, have a powwow. It is imbued with song and dance and costume that is traditional. It is an expression of culture that is not being performed to make money. It's being performed to bring the community together, to enact certain rites and rituals. Amish quilt making. You may have heard the Amish are famous for their handmade quilts, and the quilts sometimes tell a story. The Amish believe that only God is perfect, so they will often put an imperfection in the quilt deliberately, like having a piece of a square going in the wrong direction, as a humbling exercise. So these quilts are not made to make all kinds of money. They're made to pass on tradition within the community and within families. Hula dancing in Hawaii. Hula dancing is a cultural ritual that is sometimes performed for tourists, but it's often also performed for its own sake as a way of celebrating local culture. And then we have local crafts. In some areas of the country, there might be certain foods or handmade items that are an expression of the culture of that area. For example, in the American Southwest, you might find a lot of turquoise and silver jewelry being made as an expression of local culture. So all these things come under the umbrella of folk culture, something that is done as an expression of the culture that brings the community together. A second type of culture we would call high culture. Now that sounds very snooty, right? This is things like the examples given here: ballet, the symphony, fine art museums, things like that. These are cultural experiences that are traditionally available to the educated or wealthy. Some characteristics of high culture: it can be expensive. If you've ever been to a Broadway show or even the Broadway touring shows at Miller, you know that those tickets are pretty costly. So these experiences might not be available to everyone because the cost is prohibitive. Sometimes they involve travel. Let's say you wanted to go to Paris to tour the Louvre Museum, or even you wanted to go to Chicago to tour the Chicago Institute of Arts. Those experiences involve travel, which involves transportation and hotel expense and things like that. So that puts them out of reach for people who can't afford them. And then they also require a certain level of education or exposure to the arts that enables you to understand or appreciate them. Not everybody is going to appreciate classical music or certain kinds of art if they haven't been taught about them or raised in a culture that appreciates them. So people like you and me sometimes get to have these high culture experiences. I've had some of them, and I imagine you have too. But for us, it's an occasional treat because usually they're kind of out of our league a little bit because they're too expensive, and they can be a little difficult to understand for the masses. On the other hand, there's low culture, and I don't want you to think of low culture as being something shameful or unworthy or something like that. It just means it's culture that's available to the masses. So it's accessible to most people. Things like television, football games, magazines, novels, things like that, that just about everybody can afford to partake in. and just about everybody will have access to. So some characteristics of low culture experiences, they tend to be low in cost, so they're affordable for most people. They tend to be local, so you wouldn't have to travel and incur a lot of travel expense in order to get to them. And they are easy to understand or appreciate. So you don't have to have a special education in music or art or something like that to understand these kind of cultural experiences. So this is the kind of cultural experience that most of us engage in most of the time. So that leads us into our topic for today, popular culture or pop culture. Popular culture or pop culture is just another name for low culture. So the things I just talked about referring to low culture also apply to pop culture. The terms can be used interchangeably. Pop culture is systems or artifacts that most people share, most people know about. So pop culture examples would be things like highly rated television shows, the shows that everybody's watching and that you could talk about with a classmate or a coworker and they probably saw it too. Big blockbuster movies, the same kind of idea. A lot of people saw it and would know what you were talking about and be able to engage in conversation with you because they had had that experience too. And affordable fashion. You might have heard the term fast fashion before. Stores like Forever 21 or H&M that have kind of inexpensive, trendy clothes that are not super high quality and they're going to go out of style quickly. But they are an affordable way for a lot of people to experience fashion trends just for one season. So we all take part in these kinds of pop culture experiences that are commonplace and affordable and easy to access. Now, at the beginning of the lecture, I talked about folk culture and how those folk experiences were things that people didn't do to make money. Well, now we're going to the flip side. Culture industries do exist to make money. They exist to create and export pop culture with the purpose of making money. And a great example of this is Disney. Think about the Frozen franchise of Disney. The movie came out and then there were plush toys, there were Halloween costumes, songs, songbooks, sequel movies that went straight to video, just about everything you can imagine. And it was all created from the ground up and it's being sold and perpetuated in order to make money. It's a money maker for Disney. So Disney is what we would call a culture industry. A lot of television producers are also culture industries. There are certain shows that are all over the world, and the producers are making money on all of these different franchises. One example would be Dancing with the Stars. This started in Britain as a show called Strictly Come Dancing, and now they're in 42 countries. So the BBC International distributes that and makes a lot of money off the various versions of Dancing with the Stars. A couple of other ones are the Idol franchise, like American Idol. The Idol franchise started in Britain as a show called Pop Idol, and it's all over the world now. And then America's Next Top Model. This one originated in Germany. Heidi Klum actually founded the Top Model show. And when you look at the different versions of Top Model around the world, it's really interesting because it gives you glimpses into what those cultures consider to be feminine beauty ideals. In the supplemental videos folder here on e-learning, there are two videos I'd like you to watch. One is about American Idol around the world, and one is about the Top Model franchise around the world. Now, when you click on the supplemental videos folder and you scroll to the bottom, you'll see a button that says Load More. You'll need to hit that button to get to these videos because the video list is very long and it's gone on to a second page. But further down near the bottom, you'll see one that shows the opening credits of Idol shows around the world, which is really fascinating. And then another one that shows the opening credits of Top Model shows around the world. And I think it's going to be really interesting for you to consider the different beauty standards that exist. Here is a list of pop culture industries around the world. So we've all probably seen shows like America's Got Talent. They would fall in the singing or talent category. Adventure or stamina, shows like Survivor or The Amazing Race have been shown all over the world. different versions for different cultures and different countries. Beauty and modeling we've talked about. Families and groups. Now this list is a little dated here, but we've seen shows where you take supposedly hidden cameras inside someone's family setting. Those are popular all around the world. I understand the Kardashians franchise is very popular in parts of Europe. Creative talent like cooking shows, Food Network, Project Runway, game shows. It's really fascinating to look at Wheel of Fortune. If you want to really go down a rabbit hole on the internet, Wheel of Fortune exists in just about every country on earth, and it's quite fascinating to see what their hostess and host look like and sound like in these different cultures, because they all have their own version of Pat Sajak and Vanna White, or I guess nowadays it would be Ryan Seacrest and Vanna White. And then some popular sitcoms. Again, there's a handful listed here. The list might be a little dated, but many of those are popular all over the world. Now, when you take a look at those videos I mentioned with the openings of Idol and Top Model around the world, and especially when you look at the Top Model opening credits in the various countries, you'll see that in some of these countries, the models depicted are very skinny, just like bone thin. And in others, like in Britain, the women are a little curvier and have a little more meat on their bones than the skinny representations. Interestingly, in Mexico, in the opening credits of Top Model, where they're showing each of the women, there's a number next to them. And at first I was wondering what that is, but then I realized the numbers are like 19, 22, 18, 21. And I thought, oh my goodness, that's their age. So what would a critical scholar think of the fact that those women's ages are being depicted in that particular culture and maybe not in other cultures? In the, I believe it's the Chinese opening to Top Model, they show the women in cute little like school uniforms looking very innocent. And then next to that is a picture of them dancing in a bikini. So there's a juxtaposition of sweet and sexy there. Some of the Top Model versions of women are very smiley, and in others they're very solemn looking. You get differences in hairstyles. Some countries depict a lot of diversity in their Top Model contestants, others do not. So as outsiders looking in, we would draw conclusions about what the culture values based on what we see. When you look at those videos, it'll be quite enlightening, I think, and it'll give you some food for thought as to how money can be made by perpetuating these franchises and spinning them off and putting them in different countries and adapting it culturally to the various settings. Let's talk about cultural texts. Cultural texts are cultural messages, especially ones that come from pop culture, and these are some sort of an artifact. It's not necessarily written, but it can be. Now, when we think of a text, we think of something written, but a TV show could be a cultural text, or a series of photographs could be a cultural text. Something tangible that you can analyze and draw conclusions about a culture from would be a cultural text. So, for example, I was talking about those opening credits of the Top Model shows around the world and how they differ. Those would be a cultural text, and you could analyze it from that perspective. Another example would be when I was in graduate school, I wrote a paper on a particular season of Project Runway because there was an interesting dynamic among the contestants in that season that had to do with lying and deceiving each other. So I did an analysis of that season of Project Runway from a critical perspective, taking into account the fact that it's an edited show. And the producers were showing us what they wanted to show us. They were curating the image of each of these contestants for the viewing audience. By just examining the dynamic of how the people interacted with each other, I was using that season of Project Runway as a cultural text. You could use clothes. If there was a museum exhibit of 18th century women's gowns or something like that, you could analyze those as a cultural text. It's just a tangible thing, a tangible representation of a culture that you could analyze that could tell you something about the culture and what it values, what it cares about, what it puts forward. So some examples here, romance novels are cultural texts. Magazines, reality shows, soap operas, Any of those kind of things we would consider a cultural text, and they can be a lot of fun to analyze. Magazines, as I mentioned, are a huge part of pop culture, and magazines sell advertising based on what they call reader profiles. So they're telling the prospective advertiser who their average customer is. You know, for example, our customer is a female between 18 and 35 who works full time and has disposable income and things like that. And so when an advertiser buys ad space in that magazine, they're buying access to that average reader. So what does the average reader look like? That's what they're concerned about. And that's why we have so many specialized magazines, because advertisers are trying to reach those very specific target markets. So if you go into Meijer, Walmart, or a gas station or any place like that, look at a rack of magazines and you'll see a lot of specialized magazines. I mean, there's some for general interest, you know, like People or something like that, but there are many that are just really specialized for people who like quilting, or for people who like hunting and fishing, or guns, or people who collect certain things. Looking at these magazine covers here, you can guess who the representative reader is of each of these. The Girls Life magazine on the left, the reader profile there would probably be a teenage girl. We see this girl on the cover. She's pretty, she looks young, and then you look at the blurbs on the cover. Fall fashion you'll love, my first kiss, your dream hair. All the topics are about how to look pretty, how to be popular in school, things like that. So that's the person the advertiser is buying access to. On the other hand, you look at Boys Life on the right and you see that the cover story is Explore Your Future. There are pictures of a firefighter's helmet and a police badge and an airplane and a microscope and things like that. So what this artifact tells us is that boys are interested in things that are active, and they're interested in careers and things like that. So I've seen studies done on this particular picture, this image, this pair of magazines next to each other, analyzing the topics in each one and why would you not include the career stuff in the girls magazine and things about appearance in the boys magazine. Is it because boys don't care about their appearance too? But again, the advertisers in these are buying access to a specific kind of reader, and advertisers in Girls Life are buying access to a girl who cares about those things, like they're going to try to sell her shampoo and makeup and things like that. When you think back to some of your earlier communication classes, you might remember learning about a source and a receiver, an encoder and a decoder. So the source or the encoder encodes a message and sends it to the receiver, who then decodes it. But you're always decoding through your perceptual set. Okay, so what was intended and what was perceived may not match up. It can change in the process. So let's look at the magazine cover for Girls Life. What is encoded in that cover is, if you're a young woman and you want to be happy, then you care about the way you look. You care about being popular, and you care about having soft and shiny hair and being a good kisser and things like that. That's the message that was encoded. But what is decoded? Well, if I'm a young woman going up to the newsstand looking at that cover, the message I might receive through my perceptual set may be, well, they're really demeaning young women to think that those are the things we care about and that magazine is garbage. If that's my attitude, I am not decoding the same message that they encoded. Something was lost in the process. So we're always negotiating through our own perceptual set what things mean. Meaning doesn't exist in and of itself. It's created in that process of decoding. We determine what things mean. An example here says, what does porn mean? There's a famous saying, what is pornography? Well, I don't know, but I know it when I see it. So think about that. Think about the word vulgar. What is vulgar? Well, it's going to be different for everybody. Something that's perfectly normal to one person might seem vulgar to another person. So keep this in mind, that we may not decode these cultural messages in the same way that they were intended. For some examples of encoding and decoding, think about things like children's toy commercials. You see little kids playing with a toy. The message that's encoded there is that this toy is fun. You got to have it. You're going to have friends and fun. You're going to laugh if you get this toy. And the subtext is go ask mommy and daddy to buy it for you, right? That's the message that's encoded there. Now, does the child decode it in the same way? Sometimes, sometimes not. They're going to filter it through their own perceptual set. So maybe that toy doesn't look like fun to that particular kid. Soft drink commercials. They're usually depicted as people outdoors running around having fun, drinking Mountain Dew or Pepsi or Coke or what have you, having fun with friends. Again, the idea, the message is that if you buy this product, you will have this kind of life. Fast food commercials often work the same way. They depict friends or family eating and enjoying that food and enjoying each other. So the message that's encoded there is that partaking of this food is not only tasty, but it's going to offer you a sense of warmth and companionship and belonging. Beer and alcohol commercials are interesting to analyze as a cultural text because they usually depict a group of adult friends watching a game or something and just laughing and having a great time while they're drinking their beer or whatever. So again, the message that's being coded there is that this product will lead you to fun camaraderie and a sense of belonging. And that's really what they're selling as much as the beer itself. Now, if we put on our critical thinking hats, we're going to put our critical scholar hats on and realize that not every advertiser goes with the standard cultural message. Some of them go against it or they preempt the message. One example of this is the Dove Real Beauty campaign. Dove in this campaign is saying the rest of the world thinks beauty is tall, skinny white women, but we're going to go against that and try to show beauty in a variety of skin colors and body shapes. And we're going to try to maybe get ahead of the message and drive the message. So the Dove campaign for Real Beauty uses models like those you see here who represent a variety of different shapes and sizes and colors. Now, is this truly a diverse group? You could argue both sides of that. I mean, they're all reasonably attractive, and while they are of different weights, none of them is seriously obese. So there are some body types that aren't represented here. Also, the very skinny woman isn't represented here either. So they might have a ways to go as far as representing all the ways of looking at beauty. But the idea behind this campaign and what they're saying to the consumer through this is we're trying to encode our products to say that they're for you and you and you and all the women out there who don't fit the ideal and look a little different, whether you're tall or short or have heavy thighs. We want you as our customer. You are our ideal. You are perfect the way you are. That's what they're trying to say. They're trying to preempt the societal message that you have to be just one way and trying to introduce a new message that you can be yourself and be acceptable. Let's examine this idea a little further of resisting the power structures and put our critical hats on again. A lot of individuals will try to resist pop culture and not do the popular thing or go with the popular thing, and some people will fight back against cultural norms or cultural icons. One example that has been in the news a lot in recent years is Indian mascots for sports teams, Native American mascots. There's been concern about whether that is cultural appropriation, whether that is honoring or insulting particular cultures. In the area of cultural appropriation, you also have things like cornrowed hair on white women, wearing hairstyles that are typically associated with black women and vice versa. Is that cultural appropriation, and is it okay? Is it okay to wear clothing or jewelry that is associated with a particular culture just because you like it and you think it looks nice? When to that culture it may have a very deep meaning. Is that kind of appropriation appropriate? What about Halloween costumes? Is it appropriate to dress, say, like an Indian chief for a Halloween party? The picture you see here was from a campaign a few years back called Wear a Culture, Not a Costume. And it was trying to raise awareness of people wearing Halloween costumes that were actually cultural appropriation. So, for example, you see a young Asian girl holding up a poster of a geisha girl, and she's saying this is not okay as a costume. This is cultural appropriation. This has meaning that you are ignoring if you just dress like this for fun. And there were a number of pictures like this in that series of Wear a Culture, Not a Costume. I encourage you to look it up. Of people of different ethnicities holding up a picture of a Halloween costume people might wear to depict that culture and saying, this isn't right, this isn't fun, this is insulting to my people. So you do get backlash and ridicule and argument and tension about that based on perceptual set. Again, is it right to use particular names for particular ethnicities or not? Things like those are examples of people who might choose to resist pop culture and say, don't use that word. Or if you're going to wear that, you should really know what it means. Or if you're going to get a tattoo of that word or symbol in that language, you should understand the deeper meaning behind what that is, and not just get it because you think it looks cool. When you watch this part of the video, I'd like you to pause and go on e-learning in the supplemental videos folder and look at 2 videos that are near the bottom of the list there. Now, when you click on supplemental videos, you're going to scroll to the bottom. You're going to have to click load more because, again, the list of videos is very long and it goes on to another screen. But near the bottom, you'll see a video for a Jell-O commercial and a video about racism in Disney. And those are the videos that I'm referring to in this part of the lecture. A fun thing you can do is go online and go down a rabbit hole looking at old TV commercials, and you'll find a lot of things that today we would label inappropriate from our current perceptual standpoint. When they were made, when they were encoded, that might have not been the intention, but there was a lot of institutionalized racism, sexism, and other attitudes in the culture at that time that have changed since, and perhaps it wasn't even noticed that much at the time. For example, the Jell-O commercial, you'll see a cartoon of a baby in a high chair that was wearing a little pointed hat, and they say, oh, Chinese baby like Jell-O, and they were talking in this fake Asian accent and depicting a Chinese baby liking Jell-O. It was supposed to be funny, I guess, but nowadays we would probably look at that and say that doesn't feel right to many of us through our current perceptual standpoint. With Disney, it's fascinating. If you look at some of the older Disney cartoons, you can find white privilege and racism pretty easily. One of my favorites when I was a little girl was the Aristocats. And there are some Siamese cats in there that are depicted very negatively with Asian stereotypes of the time. So those kind of things were quite common. Disney did not release the movie Song of the South on video because of all the racist content. It's considered racist now. It would not have been at the time it was made, perhaps, but they did not release it for home viewing. They kept it in the archives. Fantasia, when they released it a few years ago, they cut parts out of it that were determined to be racist, and you'll see those on the video I've included on e-learning. So we can ask ourselves the question, do these just reflect the times? Are they just a cultural artifact of the times that should be left alone? And should they be studied now from a critical perspective and commented on? Or should we change them after the fact? Should we say we don't want people seeing that anymore? We don't want kids watching that nowadays, so we're going to edit stuff out. Are we going to make it hidden history that we just don't allow people to see anymore? And you could argue all sides of that. Do we leave it alone as a cultural artifact? Do we use it to educate people? Or do we take the risk that they might take it at face value? Do we edit it to change it to reflect the sensibilities of today? And Disney has kind of done that. They've held things back from release and have re-edited things to meet modern sensibilities. Another depiction in Disney that's incorrect historically is Pocahontas. The real Pocahontas was about 12 years old. She was not in a romantic relationship with John Smith, as she is in the cartoon. She's depicted as an adult woman who is sexualized and in a romantic relationship with the white settler who comes to her land. So all kinds of problematic stuff there. She embraces and welcomes the white man who comes. It would be different if it was the historically correct story of a 12-year-old child acting as a guide for this man versus an adult woman engaging in a romance with him against the will of her people, which is what's depicted in the cartoon. What is worrisome is that a lot of people who don't know about the real historic Pocahontas are going to look at that cartoon and take it as authentic when it's very far from authentic. So if you look at these things with a critical eye, you realize that they can be problematic in these ways. So I'd like you to ponder, should we leave it alone or change it? Do we comment on it? Do we just let it stand as is and let everybody filter it through their own perceptual set? Or do we resist and push back against these depictions in pop culture? Our perceptions of other cultures are highly influenced by the pop culture that we see from them. So you see pop culture of, say, England or Germany or Korea, and you've never been to those countries and you don't know much about those cultures. Pop culture is going to be very influential on the way you think about those cultures. And it works the other way too. There's certain iconic things about American culture that people in other places in the world will think are representative of what we're like when maybe they have nothing to do with what we're like. So consider some of the things I've listed here. The show Sex and the City is very popular overseas, so is Friends. And both of these shows depict young people in a big city in expensive apartments with interesting, prestigious jobs, making a lot of money and having really exciting social lives. And if you don't know anything about American culture, and especially about young people who are right out of college and what they can afford and what kind of jobs they work, you might assume that was the norm in America because we're exporting that idea. As I mentioned, the Kardashians is very popular overseas, and I always say I hope people don't think that depicts the typical American family, but that kind of show does put a certain image out into the world of what things are like, and it can be erroneous. Cecil the Lion, you may or may not remember this. This was quite some time ago, but there was a story in the news where a big game hunter had killed this lion. A trophy hunter killed this lion, and the lion had been prowling around a village. It lived in the outskirts of the village for its whole life, and it was named Cecil. And there was an outcry on the part of Americans in Western culture that it was so terrible that this man had killed this magnificent beast. Interestingly, there were other stories juxtaposed against that of the people who lived in that village. A lot of them were glad the lion was gone because they were afraid of it. They were afraid of letting their kids play outside and things like that, and they considered it a threat to their community. And while none of them were going to kill it, and some of them thought it was wrong that it was killed, they were still kind of relieved that it was gone. So there was a flip side to that story of, oh, it's so terrible that this person did this, but the flip side of that was that some of the locals were glad that it happened. So remember that perceptual set and standpoint is going to make a huge difference in the way we interpret culture. So to wrap things up, I'd like you to consider how pop culture creates and reinforces stereotypes of us and of other people, and how our desire for inclusion in what's considered popular or cool or mainstream affects our attitudes toward our own culture. Think about what is American? What does it mean that something is American? What are American values, for example, and who gets to decide? And always consider what happens to underrepresented audiences when it comes to pop culture. Who is not depicted there and why are they missing? And to conclude, I'd like you to consider the idea of cultural imperialism, or an empire of culture that gets propagated around the world. Britain, America, the English-speaking Western world often dominates culture around the world. The dominance of the economically successful, the culturally successful. Media imperialism, American media can be pervasive in a lot of places, especially in this age of cable television. People in other parts of the world can watch American television, often even live newscasts and things like that. So the world has gotten smaller in a way, and culture has gotten more homogenous across the world. Also consider the idea of nationalist discourse. Some countries do have a national media. This can be positive or negative depending on your perspective. We know in Britain they have the BBC, and a lot of their television programming is run by the British Broadcasting Corporation. We also know that in some countries like North Korea and China, the media is censored and people are only allowed to see certain things. So think about how that censorship affects nationalist discourse and how people talk about their country, other countries, how people understand other areas of the world. That concludes Chapter 9. I will see you in the next video.